Hi, this is Tim of the 1916 Company. Welcome and thanks for logging on. We're starting the new year off right with weekend watches, waking up, and everything you see is for sale. I am still Team Mosso at thewatchbox.com to buy, trade, or sell. Trade us a watch when you're not wearing for when you will, or sell us a watch or even an entire collection. No upper limit on value paid. We pay cash, we pay fast, we walk you through and make the process easy. To buy, trade, or sell, reach out to me. I am T Mosso at thewatchbox.com. Jumping straight in, we have one of my favorite sports watches. When the Vacheron Constantin Overseas Collection launched its third generation in 2016, the watch industry was in transition. It was an industry recession. While the world as a whole was doing all right, the watch industry was firmly in distress. As a result, the considerably more upscale Generation 3 Overseas initially stumbled out of the box. But here's the thing, it's a fantastic watch whose time has come. Because of the refinements that went into this generation, it's one of the most sophisticated and thoughtfully conceived watches in its segment. Taking a quick look at the reverse side, you can see this 41mm steel watch now has an in-house caliber, a display case back, and Geneva hallmark. None of that was true of the first two generations of Overseas. You can see the hallmark is on the case as well as on the bridges. It's an inside-out standard for watchmaking quality. You'll also note it's anti-magnetic and a formidable 150 meters water resistant, exceptional for this class. There is a paramagnetic iron ring or soft iron ring around the outside of the movement that helps to channel magnetic field lines around the sensitive hairspring and escapement. We have a engraved 22 karat winding mass on ceramic bearings, 4 separate finishes on this compass rose style mass, and 22 karat, not 21, not 18, and definitely not rose gold plated tungsten. Super upscale. A quick release system for the bracelet. It includes a strap in leather and a strap in rubber along with this full bracelet. Note every single link on both sides of the bracelet is removable for precise sizing, and we have a 1.5mm micro adjustment on each side of the clasp. Let me show you how this works. In and out, sleeved and seamless, 1.5mm, and you can see that on both sides. So you have a total of 3mm of incremental adjustability, plus all of those removable links, so you can really get down to business and size this watch properly. Jumping back to the dial side, you can see a lovely black lacquered dial with white gold logo, date frame, indices, and hands. We'll do a quick lume shut. It has a wonderfully warm and endearing blue glow to it in the dark. Just about the only feature it doesn't have is hacking seconds, but it does have a quick set date, a movement automatic winding with twin barrels and a 60-hour power reserve. It's adjusted in 5 positions, which is the high horology and chronometer standard. Finish is outstanding. Now the watch is large, although 41mm, I recommend you think of it as more of a 42 or a 43. I'm going to show you what it looks like on my wrist right here. My wrist is 16 centimeters in circumference, fairly thin, oval in profile and flat across the top, so you get a good sense of how this watch is going to wear on your wrist. In fact, let's zoom out and get a better sense of my arm and my hand. You can see that this is a good fit, but if your wrist is smaller than 15 centimeters circumference, you're probably going to want to look at a smaller Vacheron. That said, it is pretty flat, and with a sloped bezel, it will slide underneath the dress cuff. Now, a completely different take, and a much older take on the integrated bracelet sports watch, comes from Audemars Piguet. Now, the original Royal Oak debuted back in 1972, penned by the legendary Gerald Genta. It was designed to read as a bracelet, albeit one that included a timepiece, as Genta considered himself first and foremost a jewelry designer, and that was the profession with which he most directly and primarily identified. So you cover up the timepiece of a Royal Oak, and you get a beautifully integrated bracelet. Abnormally, by modern standards, Audemars Piguet decided in 2016 that it was going to revisit yellow gold, the boldest and oldest of golds. And so this version of the Royal Oak Chronograph came out in 2016 with a lovely Grande Tapisserie dial and yellow gold. So the much sought blue tone with yellow gold. The bracelet by itself takes 9 to 11 hours to hand finish, and the finishing, the metal finishing on a Royal Oak is a big part of what you're paying for. The bolts inside of the octagonal bezel, they're hexagonal. You can see they're slightly sunken in. That is a sign that the watch has been minimally, if ever, refinished. You want to have these sunken below the plane of the bezel. When they become even, that is the threshold for replacement at AP. So you can see it's a nice thing that these are still well countersunk. all the way around. Now, they are hexagonal, they are bolts, not screws, which is how they can align all the way around. The rounded octagonal bezel, inspired by a vintage diving helmet. We have screw-down crowns over here, and a 50-meter water resistance rating, which means it is surface swimmable. The bracelet is quite robust and fixed to the case using screws and bars, which is a more secure arrangement than spring bars. The dial features over 20,000 tiny details. If you look very closely, you can see that the hobnails have a small texture on top of them and a somewhat coarser texture in between them. And so there are 20,000 individual dots on this pantograph cut dial. Loom shot. The watch includes a Frédéric Piguet 1185 movement inside, which is an automatic integrated high horology chronograph caliber under 6 millimeters thick, with a 40-hour power reserve, a quick set date, a vertical clutch and column wheel for the chrono, 37 pivot jewels, and impressive 5-position adjustment. The only feature it does not have is a hacking seconds function, but thanks to the vertical clutch, if you want to just leave the center seconds of the chronograph running full time, you can do so without any additional wear and tear. Now, in my opinion, this wears larger than the Vacheron did. Still, I would say if you have an oval wrist, 16 centimeter circumference wrists like mine, should be able to wear this sizable 41 millimeter watch well, and it's only 11 millimeters thick, so it will slide underneath the cuff. Jumping from one thing to another, here's a watch that wears yellow gold more predictably, a timepiece that is evocative of antiquity and frankly qualifies as vintage in its own right. Now, in 1991, under its then new Historiques line, Vacheron revived its historic 4178 chronograph as this, the 47101. So a little bit larger than the original, but still compact at 37 millimeters. Here you can see in yellow gold. The model was made from 1991 to 2004, and the 47101 became the 47111 in the year 2000 with a screw fixed case back. This is a snap case back, characteristic of the 47101, and you can see it has 1991 to 1995 hallmarks on it, so it was built in the first half of the production run. It has beautiful flared lugs reminiscent of those which would characterize the later Malt collection. They're welded on in exquisitely handcrafted fashion, and you can see we haven't refinished this watch. We're going to leave as much of the historic fabric intact as we can. That's why you will note there are some scratches and scuffs here. The dial is a Sigma dial, the a priori marks encouraged by a Swiss precious metals trade organization starting in the early 70s. This was pretty much phased out by most brands by the year 2000, but Vacheron stuck with it longer than most, still featuring Sigma, or the Sigma-like symbol, on their dials throughout the 1990s. Now, that solid gold means indices, hands, and numerals, as well as the Vacheron logo. We have little sunken and polished registers for the running seconds and the chronograph minutes, which you can see off to the right. Note that they have little polished chapter rings internally. A tachymeter scale on the dial, characteristic of pre-1960s sports watches. On the backside, Vacheron caliber 1140. It is based on the La Magne 2310. Manual wind, 18K vibrations per hour. Overcoil hairspring, 5-position adjustment, 21 joules. We have an exquisite column wheel and lateral clutch action. And then we have a little hairspring hooking guard. It's that little golden needle that projects out underneath the curb pin regulator, and that's there to prevent the overcoil from getting hung up on the regulator during conditions of great shock or impact. It's something you see on a lot of vintage sports watches, but very rarely on a watch of the 1990s or later. Now, being 37 millimeters in diameter, and only about 43 from lug to lug. This is a unisex option today. Vintage in its own right. You can see how easily it wears on my wrist. Beautifully proportioned in any size. The original 4178 and this tribute to it are gorgeous all-timers with an all-time great movement on the inside of this one. Let's take a look at how Patek Philippe does it. Right here, we have the 5970G. 5970 came out in 2004, and it was discontinued in 2010. It was a relatively short run. When you combine all of the metals and all of the dials, you only get about 2,800 examples, so every version of the 5970 is fairly rare. 40 millimeters in diameter. It's actually only about 46.3 millimeters from lug to lug, so this is another watch that wears well on male and female wrists. Now, there are lovely blackened and oxidized hands. You could see a little bit of almost a rainbow chromatic effect on those blackened surfaces. Really cool to see. There's a vertical satination to this dial, not as dramatic as on a 5235G, but reminiscent of it. Tachymeter scale, again on the dial side, lovely stepped out lugs and a concave bezel. Turned all over here, we add the Lamagna again, but in Patek spec. And that means there are a few differences here. A big one is the presence of a 60-hour power reserve rather than 48, a free-sprung balance rather than one with a mobile stud index, an overcoil rather than a flat hairspring, Geneva hallmark finish. We have a capped column wheel and lateral clutch, the capped column wheel being a time-honored Geneva-style tradition, and then 24 pivot jewels with 6-position adjustment. It also has a full deployant clasp. And it is larger than the Vacheron, though it's not huge. We'll throw it on my wrist, get a good look at it, and you can see that this is a timepiece that wears comfortably. It is broader, it is more sizable, but you could wear this watch on a wrist as small as 14 centimeters circumference, and being white gold, it is very, very versatile, formal or casual wear. This is one you can enjoy all the time. A moon phase, a perpetual calendar, and a chronograph. Harking back to the early 1940s, the Perpetual calendar chronograph since the 1518 has been a signature of Patek Philippe, and this is one of the most desirable of all time. Last of the Lamagna Perpetual calendar chronos at Patek. Our cup runneth over today, as we have a watch that embodies the absolute best of Vacheron watchmaking. Taking a quick look here, you can see that it's a timepiece that is large, though it references a very early phase of wristwatches when timepieces tended to be very small. So inspired by a Vacheron Constantin cushion case timepiece of the first quarter of the 20th century, this is the Harmony Monopusher. It is the Monopusher chronograph from the Harmony collection that bowed in 2015. This exact model came out in 2016. It's 51.5 millimeters lug to lug, 13.1 thick, and 42 in diameter. But as I always say, when a watch is non-round, expect it to wear larger. And so this really does wear more like a 43 or a 44. And that's the way I would encourage you to think of it. It is very impressive. Again, we see a dial side scale reminiscent of pre-1960s chronographs. We also have a power reserve indicator down at the bottom. We'll fire this up, assuming I've wound it. You can see that enormous counterweighted seconds hand jump into action, a pulsation scale suitable for doctors, and then we have the little power reserve indicator down at the bottom that traces the manual wind 65-hour power reserve of this watch. On the back, we have no more Lamagna here, but now Vacheron making its own in-house chronograph caliber, specifically for a large watch, because this is a immense 32.8 millimeter chronograph caliber, the 3300, designed to fit watches of this scale. Now we still have a column wheel, and you can see that the fixing screw at center is actually shaped like the Maltese cross emblem of Vacheron. And I would go so far as to say the column wheel action here is a little bit crisper than on the Lamagna calibers you saw before. Take a look, Geneva hallmark, free sprung balance, overcoil hairspring, 5-position adjustment, 65-hour power reserve, a nice open airy aesthetic as you can see the entirety of the movement. You could see beveling on the steel and the brass parts. You could see gorgeous stripes across the bridges, engine turning on the base plate, locating pegs for various fixtures, both bridges and springs, have been polished on their heads, those pegs to locate them on substructures beneath. The polished heads really speaking to exhaustive attention to detail. We have satination on the steel parts, Côte de Genève and perlage on the brass parts, satination on the wheels, screw heads black polished with chamfered circumference. Notice Geneva hallmark on both the watch and the movement itself. This one's just packed with tech and beauty, and a lovely evocative shape. If you love the look of very old wristwatches, but you don't like wearing them as though you had a quarter or a nickel strapped to your wrist, you want something with more presence, this is the ticket. With unimpeachable quality and design integrity from a company that's been around a quarter of a millennium and will always be around to service your watch. Okay, we have a couple that are going to peg the meter now, starting with a 7 Masters series Goldpfeil commission. This is the GPVH, the 7 Masters series watch made for Goldpfeil, a retailer, by Vianney Halter. Now, the 7 Masters in the name were 7 AHCI master independent watchmakers commissioned by Goldpfeil to create 7 unique references for the company's retail operation. And Vianney Halter created this one. 108 of this white gold model were made. One more was also made with heavy jewelry, that is fully gem set. This watch is designed to evoke a vintage film camera in profile, which has both recesses in media blast and satination across its top with a rounded tonneau-like profile. Vianney hand-hammered the faceplate of the watch to look like the faceplate protector in leather on a traditional camera. And then we have these apertures for a super accurate moon phase, 122 years, a jump hour, and then your coaxial seconds and minutes with the Goldpfeil arrow. So this is designed to look like a vintage camera, right down to the film advance that is alluded to by this special crown, and it is a lot of fun to play with this. Jump hours tend to be a lot of fun to play with. So you have that jump hour system, but then if you turn it in the opposite direction, note the moon phase, you can adjust the moon phase like so. Now it's also equipped with a special buckle, entirely unique to this reference, designed to resemble the loading tray of a roll film camera. So you push the bottom down. It's easy to do when you're not behind the camera. There you go. And you can see that's how you feed the strap through the buckle. And when closed, the tolerances are superb. It is utterly flush, just like the loading hatch for film on a vintage camera. Flip it all over, and you might not guess what this is at first glance. It's actually a Peso 7001 drivetrain, but every part was scratch built by Vianney Halter, who also converted it to an automatic winding system of his own design. So 35 joules, 3 hertz, automatic winding, 42-hour power reserve, 122-year moon phase, jump hour, coaxial seconds and minutes, and then we have a strap that is specific to the model. You can see the Goldpfeil arrow there. You could see it in the form of the minute hand. Then you could see it again on the logo. This was the most expensive and complex of the 7 Masters watches, and it's considered to be the most sought after by collectors. It's also quite compact. It's only 29 millimeters wide by 40 millimeters lug to lug, so just about anyone can wear this. I'd compare it to something more common, like a Reverso Grand tie case in terms of how it wears. Very, very special. The jump hour and the hammered faceplate just kill me. Super cool. Lange, back in 2011, decided the world needed a Richard Lange Tourbillon pour le Merite. And in 2014, it needed one in white gold. So in 2014, Vacheron gave us this 41.9 millimeters in diameter with white gold and a sterling silver dial. This is the Richard Lange pour le Merite Tourbillon. Now, you know, in Lange speak, Richard Lange means we have Roman numerals on the dial. Pour le Merite means we have a fusee and chain constant force device. And we have exquisitely skeletonized 3/4 bridge over it so that you can actually see a lot more of the movement than on a standard Lange watch. So you could see the fusee and the barrel, the 15 centimeter long, 0.5 millimeter wide chain that has 636 pieces. By the way, don't underestimate it. That little chain can suspend 2 kilograms. We have the winding action where it winds from the barrel to the fusee, and the way this works is the fusee is a hyperboloid. So over time, as the barrel loses torque, the chain effectively climbs the fusee. And what happens is that it works like bicycle gearing, where as the torque of the mainspring ebbs, it will pull a larger diameter of the fusee, which is then geared to the drivetrain, delivering constant force to the escapement for 36 hours. And you can see that there is a planetary system inside of the fusee, and that allows us to wind the watch without interrupting the torque flow to the escapement. Now, if you look carefully, you can see we have 31 synthetic rubies, but 1 real diamond. And that brilliant cut diamond sits underneath the tourbillon carriage. We have a freehand engraved under support for the tourbillon cage. The lower pivot sits on a freehand engraved cock. We have both black polished and fire blued steel screws, glasuta stripes across German silver bridges. We have perlage or engine turning in 3 different sizes, and the nickel copper zinc of the German silver, especially the copper, gives it that golden hue. You could see mirrored anglage, jewels set in golden chaton, as they would have been in the pocket watch era. The dial is made of sterling silver. It has what's called a Seifert scale, after Johann Seifert, the watchmaker who invented this triple overlap. It's not a Venn diagram. And we will demonstrate one of the exquisite features of this watch, which is first, that we have a hacking seconds tourbillon that also acts as the seconds hand of this regulator dial. But if we keep advancing, you can see the watch hides the unnecessary numerals when they are not required, so you have a better view of the tourbillon. And this features a full clasp, which is an unusual thing on Lange watches, as they tend to include pin buckles even on complications. Throw it on the wrist, it's definitely large by Lange standards, being about 49 millimeters from lug to lug, but it's also fairly flat at under 13 millimeters thick. So if your wrist is my size or larger, and remember, I'm 16 centimeters, you're going to find this watch wears really well. Finally, the grand finale, we have this spectacular de Bethune DB28 tourbillon jumping seconds. This model came out in 2012. Very, very few have been made. Although it's 45 millimeters, it's in grade 5 titanium and sapphire, so very, very light. It also has the company's signature variable geometry ergonomic spring-loaded floating lugs, and it's about 12.6 millimeters thick. Now on the dial side, you can see all the action. This is a watch you don't feel like you have to wear upside down to get the most out of the aesthetics of the movement. And you can see there's a lot going on. So from bottom to top, let's start with the power reserve indicator that turns from red to silver as you wind it. The power reserve is 4 days. We have the world's lightest tourbillon, 18 hundredths of a gram. It's made of white gold, titanium, and silicon. The escapement is silicon. We have a 30-second period, so it moves twice as fast. It circles twice as fast as a standard tourbillon. It beats at 36,000 vibrations per hour, so 10 beats per second, like a Zenith El Primero. This is Denis Flageolet's titanium and white gold patent balance, designed to maximize the mass in the rim, reduce the effect of aerodynamic drag on timing, and also neutralize the effects of temperature change on timing. We have a hairspring that's actually 2 pieces, cut in half, reformed by hand, and then clamped together so it's flat like a flat hairspring and shock resistant like a flat hairspring, but breathes concentrically like an overcoil. And you could see that there's a mirror underneath, so you can take full advantage of the reflected light to really appreciate that mechanism. The watch has a Deadbeat seconds escapement at the center, so you can see 2 pallet stones. There's 2 coaxial 14-karat gold wheels that underpin the secondary escapement for the Deadbeat, and this is one of the few center second DB28s you'll encounter. Also very cool, I'll demonstrate this now, it does have a bullhead winding system. So you see how that works right there? And then when I activate the setting, I activate hacking seconds, which is a feature that very few de Bethune watches have ever featured, have ever included as a refinement. 2 barrels, self-adjusting, cannot accidentally be overwound. And on the back, twin gold wheels, double lever, jumping second, DB28 ST, and an easy watch to wear. Very comfortable, very flat. Although it is big, it wears small, and it's very friendly with the cuff, as you can see, thinner than you might have expected. This is what independent watchmaking is all about. Shoot the moon, ambition and imagination. And of course, full disclosure, my company owns de Bethune, but you can go back to 2016, watch my very first de Bethune review, and you will hear me say that this is a company that only builds Grail watches. I'm fortunate to live in a world where my company buys my favorite watchmaker. Does that happen at your office? So trust me, when I tell you where my next watch will come from, it will be de Bethune. And I hope that if this is possible for you, if the numbers make sense, that this might be your next watch. If you love this watch or any you see here, reach out to me. I am Team Mosso at thewatchbox.com for purchase and pricing details.